This is part 2 of our discussion on the different types of stages. We are going over the 5 most common types of stages that you will find in theater today. Again, these are not the only 5 types of stages that are being built, but they are the 5 most common. So just to review proscenium stages we talked about in the first discussion, they are in fact the most common. They're called proscenium stages because they have what is known as a proscenium arch, which is the framework that goes around the stage to sort of help guide the audience's eyes and keep their attention focused on the action on the stage. Sometimes the front end of the stage will extend out towards the audience, which is what is known as the apron. We've already discussed that. So the apron can be removed for the orchestra to play in the orchestra pit for musical presentations. And then we've also taken a look at thrust stages. Thrust stages are called thrust stages because the stage is projected out or thrust into the auditorium, which then allows the audience to sit on 3 separate sides of the stage. Now, stages like this had been being built since the 1940s, and they're used really to increase the intimacy between actors and the audience by bringing the actors much closer to the people who are sitting in the audience. And it allows for much more personal, private, and much more smaller scale productions, which focus more the attention on the actor and the performance rather than, let's say, like the spectacle of a large scale play. So proscenium stages have the audience seated on one side. Thrust stages have the audience seated on 3 sides, and now we're going to take a look at theater in the round. So theater in the round is also known as arena theater. These specific types of theaters have really been only built in about the last 30 or 40 years. We've had stadium style seating for theater all the way back into the ancient Roman times with gladiators in the Colosseum. But these specific theaters are now being built to really cater to the idea of an audience being on all 4 sides. So theater in the round, or arena style theater, is got a central performance area that is completely enclosed by the audience on all sides. It's like an island of a stage, right? So the actors, to get onto this stage from the backstage area, here the backstage area is underneath all of the audience in this stadium. The actors have to come out through these little tunnels on the 4 different corners of the stage, and those tunnels are referred to as vomitories. So they are called vomitories because the Greek word vomit means to spew forth. So your fun little the more you know moment. So anytime now you see a football player coming out of the locker room and rushing out onto the field from underneath the stadium bleachers, or a basketball player coming out from the locker room running out onto the court, you now know what they are really doing is running out the vomitory. Scenery in a theater in the round space is going to be very minimal because, as we talked about with thrust stages, with an audience being all around, or even close to being all around an actor performing on the stage, the audience's view is going to be obstructed at least partially at some point throughout the space, right? If an actor only tries to cheat out or face the direction of one side of the audience, well, then you've got 3 other sides of an audience who are either going to see the back of the head or the profile view. So actors have to constantly move around in spaces like this. And as a result, if an actor is moving all the way around, you don't really want to have a whole lot of set or scenery on the stage. And on top of all of that, the audience needs as much window into what's happening on the stage as possible. And so if you have a bunch of like tall tree props, or you have like a side wall of a house or something like that, it's going to completely obstruct the view of the audience. And again, performance on stage is meant for an audience to watch. Now, the reason that theaters like this started being built about 30 or 40 years ago was in order to get that audience's control over how actors perform and the direction that they're choosing to go, to get that removed, right? Because in the traditional way of theater, the way the proscenium style theaters have always been built, the actors have to constantly cheat out for their conversations, dances, and everything else has to be all performed towards this one direction because that's the only direction that the audience is. So really the audience being in that one side of the stage kind of controlled the way in which we performed when we were on a stage doing theater. So now when you have these theater in the round performances, the audience being on all four sides, there's this automatic understanding that there's going to be at some point people in the audience who can't see something, right? So it really makes them more of kind of just spectators watching real life happen, or real performances as close to reality as possible happen. And as a result, now actors have the freedom to kind of change the way that they act. They don't have to like turn around. They don't have to do anything like that. And that was really the purpose of why theater like this had started to come around about 30 or 40 years ago. When you see a play in a theater in the round type space, you're really kind of just watching a window into the real world, is what they try to do. So now the fourth most common is a black box stage. So black box stages are also known as studio stages. They're called black box stages because, well, look at the picture. They are black. They are a box. They're a black box studio stage. We can also call them studio stages because studio refers to like a single room. So black box stages are really flexible performance spaces, right? You can do a whole host of things in them because they don't have the typical rigging and the fly tower and the curtains. They don't have any of that. So you can do pretty much anything you want in there. Not to mention now the studio floor is in fact the stage floor, which means that the floor of the stage is the same level as the first audience row. So again, kind of like with thrust stages, it's intended to bring an audience closer to the actors and closer to the performance. And so they're really just like right there at eye level with what's happening on the stage. They are a single room painted black, and because they're flexible, because the seats aren't set into the floor, because there's not curtains and all of these other things that you kind of have to work around, it does allow for temporary setup of seating in a number of different ways. So you can create it to be like a theater in the round space where there are seats all around the audience, like the audience is all around the stage, or you can do it all, put the audience in one corner. You can do whatever you want. And the reason that the walls are in fact painted black is because black is that color that really makes anything standing in front of it really pop out, right? Because we don't have these curtains that are on the sides. We don't have the tormentors in the front and the teaser, the border curtains up at the top. There's nothing really framing what's happening on stage for the audience. So in order to make sure that the audience is attentive and seeing everything that's on the stage, you have these black walls, which then allow for the costumes and the actors and the set to kind of pop out and stand out on their own. So the final type of theater stage that we're going to take a look at as part of this discussion is what's known as open air theaters. So now open air theaters are called open air theaters because they're theater spaces that may or may not have a full roof above them. This one here in the photo that I'm providing on the slide, it has a partial roof, but that's really more to just kind of protect the audience from the elements. But there are a certain amount of lights and rigging that also need to be protected as well that go up sometimes. So open air theaters are intended to try and make use of the natural light, which is why they may or may not have that roof space above them. They are more common down here in the South and in Texas, places where the weather is allowing for an open air type performance. Where I grew up in Michigan, we didn't have a single open air theater really because 6 months out of the year, it's almost always too cold to try to do a performance outside. And the other 6 months of the year, it kind of rains a lot every couple of days. So you can really only have an open air theater nowadays in places where, like in Texas, the weather will allow for it or provide for that. So open air theaters are, in fact, the oldest type of theater space. They have been around all the way about 2,500 years ago at the inception of theater in ancient Greece. So they were used by the ancient Greeks really because, and we've talked about this in previous discussions, the way that theater sort of came about in being was they started as religious festivals held for Dionysus was the first god that was worshipped by people in the temple where these religious festivals, these yearly celebrations, or these yearly sacrifices were being made, and it was a law that every villager had to attend the religious festival or the sacrifices for the god of that village. So since it was mandatory for all of the villagers to attend, they had to have a hillside that would allow for all of them to come and sit and be present and watch as the priests performed the rites. So they started creating spaces like this that were built into hillsides that were close by to the temples so that there was a space for the audience to watch the religious festivals. Now, a quick look at some other photo examples of these stages that we have discussed. Now, the Globe Theater is just, it is the most famous of playhouses that has ever really been built. It was only around, though, for about 43 years. So the Globe Theater was in London. It was built in 1599 at the height of Shakespeare. It is the theater that was built specifically for Shakespeare and his theater company to perform their plays. In 1642, it was torn down and sold for scrap when the new King Edward decided to make theater illegal and any actor could be prosecuted and sent to prison for pretending to be anything other than themselves. So the Globe Theater is really kind of where we get a lot of these traditional ideas of how a theater is supposed to be built. You'll notice if you look in the slide right above where the stage is, you follow those two columns up, you will see this sort of small roof-like building. That is where they would hide the moon and the sun and fake clouds and other things. That's why we call it a fly tower, where the ropes and the pulley systems that will allow you to lower pieces of set down. It was a tower literally built above the stage in which you could fly objects in and out really, really quickly. So that's why we call it a fly tower, even though there's not really a tower anymore where we hide those pieces of set. This here is an ancient Greek open air theater space. This is in Athens, Greece. I've been to this one specifically, actually. You'll notice that here up in the front of the stage, there is what's left of like these ancient ruins and pillars. That object used to be a lot taller and it used to have columns and a full wall, but that is what was referred to as the scaenia, which is now where we get the word scenery or scenery or the proscenium. So that was this false wall that was constructed so that actors and pieces of set could be hidden and obscured from view behind the wall, and then you could bring them out as the performance moved on throughout the rest of the show. So that's now why we even refer to other set pieces as scenery. They are false walls that are put and pulled out for a performance. So here is a photo of an open air theater space that you may find on the San Antonio Riverwalk. Maybe you've either been there yourself to see a performance or you've been on one of those boat tours that go all along the river. This is the Arneson Theater is what it is called. So there's still a lot of performances there that happen all the time. So this is a very small theater space. It used to be a bar that was then converted into a theater. It's off of 281. It's called the Roxy, so it's here in San Antonio. The Roxy is a very, very small venue. It's only got 48 seats available, so the kind of shows that you're going to see perform there are much, much smaller. When I went to go see a play there about 3 or 4 years ago, it was a play called The Last 5 Years, and it's just a show entirely with just 2 people in it, like for the entire play. So it's got a very, very small feel to it, a very close, intimate feel. And you can see that there are seats on not 1, 2, 3, but 4 sides up there in the upper area. There's more chairs for people to watch. So because there are seats on all 4 sides, it makes it a theater in the round. So just to review, I want to take a deeper look at the proscenium stage being broken down in this diagram that you can see. Now that we've already learned a bit about the curtains and what the apron is and the stage right and stage left, you can see in this diagram now the proscenium arch over here on the left is it's kind of cut in half here to allow you to see a little bit further back. So the proscenium arch frames the stage. The curtains help to continue that frame to allow for the audience to only see directly there right in front of them. So let's review. 5 types of common stages. Proscenium stages, where the audience is just in the front. Thrust stages, where the audience is surrounding the stage on 3 sides. Theater in the round, or arena theaters, which has the audience on all 4 sides. Black box theaters, which allow for the audience to be wherever they need to be, as it's a very flexible theater space. And open air theaters, where the audience is outside. It's more like a proscenium type stage in which the audience is really only on the one side, but that is that big difference, is that the audience is now outdoors. So to sum it all up, the way that we define these different theater spaces is, in fact, the places that the audience is put in order to watch the show, right? Proscenium on one side, thrust on 3, theater in the round on all 4 sides. Black box is flexible, so they can be wherever we want them to be. In open air theater, they are in the front and outside.